evening, fourth graders, and welcome to another flipped lesson. Tonight's flipped lesson is also going to have to do with multiplication and division, but this time we're going to look at multiplication and division word problems. So before we get started, I just want to remind you it's been a couple of days since we've had a flipped lesson. You should be able to pause the video at any time and write down some notes. You can rewind if you miss something, or you could fast forward if for some reason this is really easy for you. Okay, so before we get started, let's think of what is a word problem. Word problems are math problems that represent real-world examples using math. So any word problem that you see in math is going to present itself with a real-world situation where you would use multiplication or division. Why do we solve them? Why is it important for us as fourth graders to solve multiplication problems via a word problem? And it's because we want to understand the world fully. If we can't understand that multiplication and division is related to the world in some way, we're not going to have a full understanding of what the world has to offer. So make sure that when you're solving these problems, you're understanding, oh yeah, I can see how this would relate to the world. It's important that when you're solving your word problems for multiplication or division, you want to remember this process. Now, this process doesn't have a fun acronym like we learned for division, and it's not as simple as our steps or our process for multiplication. So it's important that you understand why we have these steps and have it make sense to you before going in to reading a word problem. So the first step is to read the entire problem. If you're only reading snippets or you're only looking at the numbers, you're not understanding fully what the word problem is asking you. Second, I want you to underline what you already know or what the problem tells you. And third, you're going to find out what they want you to solve. And the last thing that you're going to do is to solve the problem and then check the problem. The checking part is very important. Just as we've learned how to check a multiplication problem, a division problem with multiplication, I want you to do that if your long division problem is through a word problem. Here's our first example. We're only going to have one example since the word problems are a bit longer, or there are a bit more processes to go through. So again, I was told that I had to read the whole word problem fully. So that's what I'm going to do. Mr. Schultz and Miss Kessler have $4,686 altogether. Mr. Schultz's share is twice as much as Miss Kessler's. How much is Miss Kessler's share? How much is Mr. Schultz's share? Okay, so that was my first step. I read the problem fully. Now the second step was to underline what we already know. So let's go through and see what we know already, what the actual word problem tells us. So the word problem tells us that there are two people, right? Mr. Schultz and Miss Kessler. And we have a certain amount of money all together. Between the two of us, we have $4,686. We also know that Mr. Schultz's share is twice as much as Miss Kessler's. So we know that Mr. Schultz has more money because it says that his share is twice as much as mine. Now, the third step for our word problems was to figure out what they want us to solve. So looking at part A, it says, how much is Miss Kessler's share? So I have to ask myself, what do I have to do to find that answer? And there might be steps that you're going to have to take before you you figure this answer out. So let's read the word problem one more time just so that we understand what the word problem is asking us to do. Mr. Schultz and Miss Kessler have $4,686 altogether. Mr. Schultz's share is twice as much as Miss Kessler's. So that's going to show me that Mr. Schultz has a share that is 2 of mine. Mine only represents 1 of his. And I got that from just reading the first paragraph. Mr. Schultz's share is twice, meaning 2 times, as much as Miss Kessler's. And we know that altogether, we have $4,686. So we know that all 3 of those units put together, or combined together, represent $4,686. That's what we know already, just from reading this problem. So this is Mr. Schultz, and I'm just going to put Mr. S, and this I'm going to put Miss K. Because my piece is going to be smaller since Mr. Schultz has twice as much as I do. Now there are 3 shares that we have to find out, and I want to find out how much is just 1 share. Well, I know that all of these shares are going to be equal. So that's telling me that I'm going to have to divide. Because this share is the same as this one, is the same as this one. How do I know that? Because when I read the first part of my word problem, it said that Mr. Schultz's share is twice as much as Miss Kessler's. 2 times means they multiplied what I had by 2, and that will give us what he has. So we have 3 parts, and I want to find out how much just 1 part is. So I'm going to divide this number by 3. So I put 4,686 inside my house because it's my dividend, and I put 3 outside my house because Mr. Schultz has 2 pieces and I have 1 piece. So the first thing I do is I ask myself, can 3 go into 4? Yes, it can. It can go in once without going over. And since I'm getting quicker at my long division problems, I'm not going to have to go through and check off. If you're still struggling with your long division problems, my suggestion is to keep your acronym at the side of your page. So we have 1 times 3 is 3. Then I do my subtraction. And I bring the next number down. How many times does 3 go into 16? Remember that strategy that I used before, and I went through my multiples of 3. I went through my multiples of my divisor. 3, 6, 9, 12, 15. I know if I go 1 more, I'll have too much, so 5 is my answer. 5 times 3 is 15. I subtract and get 1. I bring down again. And I say, how many times does 3 go into 18? Well, I know if 5 times 3 is 15, then I'm just going to add 3 more, and that's 18. So 6 times. 3 goes into 18 6 times. 6 times 3 is 18. I subtract, and I get 0. Then I bring down, because I have 1 more number to bring down, and I say, how many times does 3 go into 6? 3 goes into 6 2 times. I multiply 2 times 3. I get 6, and then I subtract. 6 minus 6 is 0. I don't have any more to bring down. I was left with 0, so I don't have a remainder, and I'm done. So that tells me that each of these pieces, since there are 3 pieces, each piece is 1,562. Since this piece is 1,562, this piece is 1,562. And since these pieces are all the same, they're equal, this piece is 1,562. So I solved it. Now I'm going to check. Does this answer my question? How much is Miss Kessler's share? I found out how much it is, but I didn't write my answer, so that's the next step for me. Miss Kessler share is 1,562. Now I have to find how much Mr. Schultz's share is. So I know that each of his pieces is worth 1,562. He has 2 pieces, so I'm going to take that number, 1,562, and I'm going to multiply it by 2. 2 times 2 is 4. 2 times 6 is 12. 2 times 5 is 10, plus 1 is 11. And 2 times 1 is 2, plus 1 is 3. So Mr. Schultz's share is 3,124. I think you guys are ready for an example. If this is challenging for you, take your time and really focus on what the word problem is asking you to do before you try to solve it. Here is your example. Take a moment and write down this entire problem in your practice section of your notebook. Remember to go back and follow each step for the word problem and take your time. Have fun.